I was walking through a hotel lobby the other day, just a standard business trip, and I opened the drawer on the nightstand, and there was a Gideon's Bible.
Ah, yes. Standard issue.
Exactly. And it struck me that we treat this object like it's a monolith, like it's this single, solid brick of truth. You hold it, it's got the black leather cover, the gold gilded edges. It just feels like one unified voice speaking to you.
The basic instructions before leaving Earth. Right, that's what they call it in Sunday school. A singular manual for life.
Yes. But then you sent me this mountain of research for today's deep dive. And I started reading through the history, the archaeology, the stuff they censored. And I realized that unified voice is, well, it's an illusion. It's a very carefully, very politically crafted illusion.
It is, I think, the greatest magic trick in literary history.
Right.
Because what you are holding in that hotel room isn't a book.
Right.
It's a library. And it is a library where the head librarian was a Roman emperor who had a very specific, very pragmatic political reason for burning half the books and keeping the others.
That is the part that really shook me in the reading. We aren't just looking at spiritual texts today. We're looking at a crime scene, in a way. We're talking about censorship, political maneuvering, assassination, and what the sources call the architecture of control.
And we have to. We have to strip away the devotional aspect. Look, if you're listening to this and you're religious, that is absolutely fine. But for the next hour or so, we need to put the faith part on the shelf and look at the machinery.
The beers and lovers.
Exactly. We're going to look at the Bible as a piece of ancient technology. Who built it? Who edited it? Who decided which memos made it to the CEO's desk and which ones, went straight into the shredder? And most importantly, who was this technology designed to control?
The roadmap you've laid out is, it's intense. We are going from the boardroom politics of the Council of Nicaea all the way to psychedelic mushrooms in the desert.
We are going to places your pastor definitely didn't talk about. But the goal isn't just to be shocking. It is to see if there is a different message buried under all the politics. A kind of freedom code hidden inside the control manual.
Okay, I like that framing.
Because when you actually read the sources, the suppressed texts, you find two very different religions fighting for the soul of this library. One is all about external control. The other is about internal liberation.
All right, let's get into the weeds. We have to start with the origin story. Not the Garden of Eden, but the boardroom where the real decisions were made. Segment 1, the architecture of control. The sources point to the Council of Nicaea, 325 AD, as the moment everything changed.
This is the pivotal moment. I mean, this is the fork in the road. Before 325 AD, Christianity wasn't really a single thing.
It was more like a startup ecosystem.
That's a great way to put it. It was the Wild West. You had dozens of different sects, different texts, different beliefs. You had Gnostics in Egypt, Jewish Christians in Jerusalem, Pauline Christians in Rome. It was, frankly, a mess. And then onto the stage enters Emperor Constantine.
Now, Constantine gets painted as this saintly figure who saw a cross in the sky, converted to Christianity, and saved the faith. But the history suggests he wasn't exactly a devout bishop, was he?
Not at all. He was a Roman emperor, first and foremost a warlord. His primary motivation was political unification. You have to understand the context. The Roman Empire was fracturing badly. It was huge, unwieldy, culturally divided. You had civil wars popping up everywhere. Constantine needed glue.
Something to hold it all together.
He needed a state religion that could bind the entire empire together under one banner, one unified ideology.
So he looks around and sees this Christianity thing, which is growing like wildfire among the poor and the soldiers, and says, that could be the glue.
Precisely. But he couldn't use a messy, debated Christianity where people are arguing over whether Jesus is a spirit or a man or an angel. He needed a standardized product. He needed a franchise model.
Of McDonald's.
Yeah.
Every burger has to be the same.
Exactly. So he convened the Council of Nicaea. He invited bishops from all over the empire to sit down and vote. And I mean literally vote.
That's the part that just blows my mind. They voted on the nature of God. Like with a show of hands.
That's basically it. They voted on the divinity of Jesus. There was a huge controversy at the time called the Arian controversy. A priest named Arius argued that if God the Father begat the Son, then there must have been a time when the Son didn't exist.
Okay, that sounds logical if you're just thinking about fathers and sons.
It's very logical, and it implies Jesus was a created being, a subordinate. But for an emperor who wanted absolute, unquestionable authority, that was weak sauce. Constantine favored the opposing view that Jesus and God were of the same substance, co-eternal.
Why? What was the political advantage there?
Because he needed a strong Jesus to mirror a strong emperor.
It's a branding exercise.
It's a perfect parallel structure. If you are an emperor, you don't want a religion that questions authority or deals in nuance. You want a clear hierarchy.
A chain of command.
And that is exactly what they built. This is where the concept of divine right of kings really starts to take root in the Christian context. By standardizing the text and making Jesus co-equal with God, they created this hierarchy where earthly power reflects heavenly power. God is the king of the universe. The emperor is his lieutenant on earth.
So if you dissent against the state,
You aren't just a rebel. You are a heretic. You are dissenting against God herself. It's the ultimate political shield.
don't blame me. I'm just following orders from the guy upstairs. But to get that unity, to get that standardized product, they had to cut some things out. This is where the censorship comes in. The sources talk a lot about Gnosticism. We hear that word thrown around, but what was the actual threat there?
The Gnostic texts, like the Gospel of Thomas, which, by the way, we only found because it was buried in a jar in Egypt in 1945, they taught a very specific message that was incredibly dangerous to an empire. The Gospel of Thomas has Jesus saying, "The kingdom is inside you and it is outside you."
Okay, the kingdom is inside you. It sounds nice, very new age. Why is that so dangerous?
Think about the implications for a power structure. Just follow the logic. If God is inside you, if the divine spark is internal, do you need a priest to interpret the will of God for you?
No.
Do you need a bishop to forgive your sins? Do you need to pay a tithe to a centralized institution to buy your salvation?
No. You just need to look inward. You can completely bypass the toll booth.
Exactly, and that is bad for business. It is very, very bad for imperial control. If everyone realizes they're a portable temple, the brick-and-mortar temple goes bankrupt. So those texts were labeled heresy. They were burned. The bishops who supported them were exiled. They systematically destroyed the narrative of internal authority and replaced it with external compliance.
It really is an information war. And it didn't stop in ancient Rome. I want to jump forward in history to William Tyndale in the 1500s. The sources highlight him as a prime example of this information control. I always just thought he was killed for translating the Bible into English so common people could read it.
That is part of it, and a big part.
Okay.
For over 1,000 years, the Bible was locked in Latin, the Vulgate. The common plowboy couldn't read it. You had to rely on the priest to tell you what God said. It was a security clearance mechanism.
A firewall.
A perfect firewall. Tyndale decided to hack that firewall. But it wasn't just that he translated it, it was how he translated it. This is a fascinating linguistic detail that gets lost.
Right, the specific words he chose. This blew my mind when I read it.
There were specific Greek words that the entire institutional church relied on to uphold their hierarchy. Take the Greek word ecclesia. It appears constantly in the New Testament.
And usually that gets translated as church.
Right. And what does the word church imply? It implies a building, a hierarchy, an institution, the Vatican, the whole structure. But Tyndale was a brilliant scholar of the original Greek, and he looked at it and said, no, that's not right. Ecclesia doesn't mean an institution. It means a gathering, an assembly. So he translated it as congregation.
That sounds like such a small change, but the vibe is completely different.
Right.
Church is a corporation. Congregation is just a bunch of people hanging out.
It totally democratizes it. And he did the same thing with the word presbyteros. The church had always translated it as priest.
Giving it that magical intermediary quality.
Yes. A priest is special. He has power. But Tyndale translated it as elder.
Which is just a wise old guy in the community.
It's a huge shift. A priest has the power to turn wine into blood. An elder just gives good advice. Tyndale's translations systematically stripped the institution of its biblical justification. He showed that the whole hierarchy wasn't in the original text. It was a series of translation choices designed to hoard power.
You were saying the emperor has no clothes.
And for that, the institution had him strangled and then burned him at the stake.
It just highlights how translation is a weapon. If you control the definitions, you control the reality. Okay, so let's move to the second segment. We've talked about the structure, the politics, the censorship. Now let's talk about the main character of the Old Testament, Yahweh.
This is where we have to take a really hard look at the evolution of the deity. Because if you read the Old Testament chronologically and critically, you see that Yahweh didn't just appear on the scene as the one and only God of the universe.
The sources use the term henotheism. Can you break that down for us? Because I think most people have two boxes. Monotheism, one God, and polytheism, many gods. What is this middle ground?
Henotheism is the belief that while many gods may exist, we worship this one because he's the best one, or he's our one. It's tribal. And the first commandment is the giveaway. It says, "Thou shalt have no other gods before me."
It doesn't say there are no other gods.
It doesn't. It implicitly admits there's competition. It says, "Don't rank them above me." It's a demand for loyalty from a tribal deity, not a grand statement of cosmology.
And there's that reference in Psalm 82, right? The divine council.
Yes, Psalm 82 is what scholars would call a smoking gun. It depicts God standing in the assembly of the gods, the Elohim. He's there judging the other gods for ruling the nations poorly.
So he's like the chairman of the board of deities.
Something like that. And this is a remnant of a much older worldview where Yahweh was likely a minor storm or warrior god from the region of Edom or Midian. Over centuries, his followers promoted him. They merged him with the Canaanite high god El, and eventually, much later, they claimed he was the only god. But the fingerprints of his origin as a tribal warrior deity are still all over the text.
That explains why his personality seems to fluctuate so much. Sometimes he's this cosmic creator making the stars, and other times he seems like a very petty, jealous warlord obsessing over foreskins and boundaries.
The sources call him an entity with a distinct personality rather than just a concept. And this leads to the moral contradictions that people, really struggle with. If you read strictly literally, you have a deity commanding genocide. 1 Samuel 15.3 is explicit. Go, attack the Amalekites. Do not spare them. Put to death men and women, children and infants.
Yeah, that's the stuff they tend to skip in Sunday school. That and the slavery codes in Leviticus.
Right. Leviticus 25 literally allows you to buy slaves from neighboring nations and own them as property forever. So you have this jealous God who demands blood sacrifice and commands total war. And this apparent contradiction is what leads us to the Gnostic conversion.
This is one of the most fascinating concepts in this entire deep dive. The idea that maybe, just maybe, Yahweh isn't the good guy. It sounds incredibly blasphemous at first, but walk us through the logic.
The Gnostics looked at the world around them, a world full of suffering, disease, decay, children getting cancer, and they said a perfect, loving, all-powerful God could not have made this mess. It just doesn't add up.
So instead of blaming humanity for screwing things up, they blamed the architect.
Exactly. They concluded that the true God, the monad, is pure light, abstract, and totally removed from the crudeness of matter. The creator of this physical world, the one who demands worship and blood in the Old Testament, must be a lesser, flawed deity. They called him the demiurge, or Yaldabaoth. And he thinks he's the only God because he is blind and arrogant.
So in this view, the Garden of Eden story gets completely flipped upside down.
Totally inverted. In the Orthodox view, the serpent is the villain tempting us to sin. But in the Gnostic view, the creator, Yahweh, the demiurge, wants to keep Adam and Eve ignorant and obedient in a cosmic zoo.
Those dumb pets.
And the serpent comes along and offers them the fruit of the tree of knowledge.
Gnosis.
Gnosis. The serpent is actually the liberator. He's Prometheus bringing fire to humanity. He's trying to free us from the control of a jealous God who demands ignorance. It's a narrative of rebellion against a tyrannical control system.
That ties right into the blood economy concept mentioned in the sources. The idea that this deity requires payment in blood.
It's the foundational premise of the Old Testament system. Blood buys life. This comes from ancient sympathetic magic. In the ancient Near East, you'd seal a covenant by cutting animals in half and walking between the pieces.
A blood pact.
A literal blood pact. The Bible takes this and turns it into a metaphysical law. You are born in debt original sin. You can't pay the debt yourself. So you need a third-party payer, a Messiah, to shed blood on your behalf.
It creates a dependency loop. It's like a credit card you can never, ever pay off.
It absolutely does. It ensures you are never truly free. You are always bought with a price. It is a brilliant mechanism for psychological control because it keeps the individual perpetually insolvent, spiritually speaking.
Yeah.
You're always guilty, and you're always reliant on the church to manage the transaction of blood for forgiveness.
It is heavy stuff. It reframes the whole theology as a kind of cosmic accounting. But let's shift gears to something that is, well, literally written in the stars. Segment 3, astrotheology. Now, I'll be honest, when I first saw this in the outline, my brain tried to reject it. It sounds like internet conspiracy stuff. The Bible is just astrology. But then I looked at the charts in the source material.
It's the hardest hurdle for modern minds because we don't look up anymore. We have iPhones, we have streetlights. But if you were a shepherd in 2000 BC, the night sky was your television, your calendar, your GPS, and your God. The movement of the stars was the only source of divine order in an otherwise chaotic world. So when you read the Bible, you are often reading allegories of astronomical phenomena.
Okay, so walk me through the Christmas timeline from the perspective of that shepherd. The sources say the Southern Cross is key here.
Okay, so imagine you're in the northern hemisphere. Starting in the summer, the days are long and warm. But as you get into autumn, the sun starts dying. It moves lower and lower across the sky each day. The days get shorter, it's getting colder, the crops are dying.
So there's a genuine primal fear that maybe the sun isn't coming back this time. The light is leaving the world.
Exactly. The light of the world is retreating. By December 21st, the winter solstice, the sun hits its absolute lowest point on the horizon. And here's the key visible phenomenon. For 3 days, December 22nd, 23rd, and 24th, the sun's position on the horizon doesn't appear to change at all. It just seems to stand still.
It sits in the grave, so to speak.
Visually, yes, it has died. And historically, in that specific region of the sky where it dies, there is a constellation called the Crux, or the Southern Cross. So the sun is effectively hanging on the cross for 3 days.
I've never heard that before. Wow. And then?
On the morning of December 25th, something miraculous happens. The sun moves 1 degree north, is risen. The days begin to lengthen again. The light of the world is born again.
So when we celebrate the sun rising on the 25th, we are literally celebrating the sun rising.
It is almost a perfect homophone in English, but the symbolism works across almost every ancient solar religion. It is the solar journey, the crown of thorns.
The sun's rays.
The solar rays are the halo you see during an eclipse. The 12 disciples.
The 12 signs of the zodiac.
The 12 signs of the zodiac that the sun travels through on its yearly journey.
It turns the Bible from a history book
Yeah.
into a localized star map. And this connects to the ages, right? The precession of the equinoxes.
Yeah.
This part always blows my mind, how the Bible seems to track the zodiacal ages.
It creates a perfect chronological timeline. Because of the Earth's wobble, the constellation that is the backdrop for the sunrise on the vernal equinox changes every 150 years or so. This is an age. The Old Testament era of the patriarchs was the age of Taurus the bull.
Which explains the whole golden calf story.
Yes, think about the imagery. Moses comes down from Mount Sinai, and he is furious that the Israelites are worshiping a golden calf. Why? It's not just because it's an idol. It's because the age of the bull is over. He is ushering in the new age. The age of Aries, the ram.
So he blows the shofar the ram's horn.
Correct. And the symbol of the covenant becomes the Passover lamb. We ritually move from the bull to the ram. Then Jesus comes along. What happens? The equinox moves into the sign of Pisces, the fish.
And suddenly everything is fish. He feeds the 5,000 with 2 fish. He calls his disciples to become fishers of men.
The early Christian secret symbol was the ichthys, the fish. It signals we are now in the age of Pisces. And then there is this fascinating prophecy in Luke 22:10 about what comes next. The disciples ask Jesus, where do we go from here? Where do we prepare the Passover for the future? He tells them to go into the city and follow a man bearing a pitcher of water.
It's a water bearer, Aquarius.
Exactly. He is pointing to the age of Aquarius, which follows Pisces. It is a signal that the Piscean age, the age of the church, of belief of the fish, will eventually end and give way to something new. It suggests the authors of these texts understood deep astronomical cycles and were encoding them into the narrative.
It really makes you see the text differently. It's not just stories. It's a time capsule with a cosmic clock. Now, speaking of Jesus, let's get into segment 4, the Jesus construct versus the church. And we have to start with this Jesus is Lucifer theory. Now, before the listeners panic, let's look at the actual words.
This sounds incredibly shocking, I know. Jesus is the devil. But we have to look at the etymology. Lucifer is not a proper name in the Bible. It's a Latin title. Lux means light, fer means to bring, light bringer. In the Roman world, it referred to the morning star, the planet Venus.
And Jesus calls himself that in the Bible.
In Revelation 22:16, Jesus says explicitly, I am the root and the offspring of David and the bright and morning star. In the Latin Vulgate, that is literally Lucifer. The Catholic liturgy for the Easter Vigil even praises the Lucifer that never sets, referring to Christ.
So theologically, how does this work? It has to go back to that Gnostic idea we were talking about, right?
Right. If you accept the Gnostic premise that the God of this world, the rigid legalistic demiurge of the Old Testament, is the one keeping us in the dark, then the light bringer becomes the hero, the rebel.
The liberator.
Yes. In the Garden of Eden, the serpent offered knowledge. In the New Testament, Jesus offers truth. He breaks the Sabbath laws. He challenges the Pharisees. He flips the tables in the temple. From a Gnostic perspective, Jesus is the Lucifer figure, the liberator, bringing gnosis to free humanity from the control system of the Old Testament God.
That creates a huge conflict with what the church eventually became. We call it Christianity, but the sources suggest it really should be called Pollyanity.
This is such a critical distinction. The historical Jesus Yeshua was a Jewish mystic, preaching a spiritual revolution, often centered on the kingdom within. He was anti-establishment. Then you have Paul. Paul never met the human Jesus. He had a mystical vision on the road to Damascus.
And Paul starts preaching something very, very different.
Paul creates a theology for the Gentiles, the non-Jews, that is about belief rather than law, and, critically, about submission rather than revolution. Paul was a Roman citizen who understood empire. Just look at Romans 13. This is the verse that has kept kings in power for 2,000 years. Paul writes, "Let every soul be subject unto the higher powers, for the powers that be are ordained of God."
That is a dictator's dream verse.
It is the ultimate tool for tyrants and slave owners. It says that if a king, a president, or a slave master is in power, God put him there. So if you rebel against the king, you are rebelling against God. This is in direct conflict with the revolutionary nature of the historical Jesus, who was executed by the state for sedition.
But the church, under Constantine, adopted Paul's version.
Of course they did. It was useful for controlling the population.
And then they added the ritual of the Eucharist to cement that control. The sources call it theophagy.
God-eating. It's pure sympathetic magic. Except ye eat the flesh of the Son of Man and drink his blood, you have no life in you.
When you step back and look at it objectively, without the religious lens, it is a very primal, almost tribal ritual.
It is. And it reinforces that dependency loop we talked about earlier. You cannot generate spiritual life on your own. You must physically ingest it from the church's official supply. It keeps you tethered to the institution. If you stop going to Mass, you starve spiritually.
Now, to keep this whole narrative tight, they had to exclude a lot of books. Which brings us to segment 5, the Forbidden Library. There's some wild stuff in here that didn't make the final cut. Let's start with the Book of Enoch.
Enoch is fascinating because it's actually quoted in the New Testament in the book of Jude, so the biblical writers knew it and respected it. But it was banned from the final canon, and you have to ask why. And the answer seems to be it's just too sci-fi.
Too sci-fi.
It describes the Watchers, a group of angels descending to Earth, mating with human women and creating a hybrid giant race called the Nephilim. And not only that, these Watchers teach humanity forbidden technology. Weaponry, cosmetics, mirrors, sorcery.
So it frames the origin of evil not as Adam ate an apple, but as advanced beings corrupted our DNA and gave us nukes.
Essentially, yes. It frames evil as an external contamination by these non-human entities. That didn't fit the nice, tidy narrative of, you are a sinner, you are born guilty, you need the church. It was too supernatural, too weird, and it shifted the blame away from the individual, so it had to go.
Then there's the Gospel of Judas. This is a relatively recent discovery. Right?
Down in the 1970s, but only restored and translated in 2006. And it completely flips the script on Judas Iscariot. In the Standard Bible, he's the ultimate traitor. In this text, he's the only disciple who truly understands Jesus.
The only one.
Jesus takes him aside and gives him secret knowledge. He asks Judas to betray him. He says, "You will sacrifice the man that clothes me."
Meaning, help me escape this physical body.
Exactly. Jesus wanted to escape the trap of the physical body, the material world created by the demiurge, to return to the spirit realm. He needed someone to trigger the execution. Judas was the loyal soldier who took the fall, who accepted eternal damnation in the eyes of the world to help his master escape. It destroys the victim narrative of the crucifixion and turns it into a planned prison break.
And we can't forget the Gospel of Mary Magdalene.
Right. The Gospel of Mary. It portrays Mary as the leader of the apostles after Jesus' death. She has secret knowledge that Jesus didn't give to the men. Peter is actually jealous and hostile in the text. He asks, did he really speak privately with a woman and not openly to us?
And you can see how a patriarchal church structure being built in Rome couldn't have a woman as the primary successor to Christ.
Absolutely not. So it was buried, just like the missing 18 years of Jesus were buried.
That's the huge gap between age 12 and 30. He's in the temple as a kid, then boom, he's 30 and getting baptized. Where was he?
The Isa theory, based on manuscripts purportedly found in Himalayan monasteries in the 19th century, suggests he joined a caravan and traveled the Silk Road to India and Tibet.
Which sounds wild.
But it makes a strange kind of sense when you look at his teachings. Turn the other cheek, love your enemy, the kingdom is within. These are core Buddhist and Vedantic concepts They are not traditional Jewish concepts of that time.
I and the Father are one. Sounds an awful lot like the Hindu concept of Atman as Brahman. The individual soul is the universal soul.
Precisely. If Jesus studied Eastern mysticism, it reframes Christianity not as a totally new religion, but as a bridge between East and West. But the church couldn't admit that their singular savior might have learned from pagans. So those years are just a blank page.
Okay, let's get into the high strangeness aspect. Segment 6, the technology of the Bible. And we are talking about biological and physical technology here, starting with
Well, drugs.
entheogens, the chemical key to the divine. Now, I want to push back on this a little bit, because it's easy to look at a story about a burning bush and just say, oh, he was high. It can feel a bit reductive. Is there actual botanical evidence for this, or is it just modern people projecting drug culture onto the past?
That is a very fair challenge. We have to look at the botany of the Sinai Peninsula. The text is very specific about the materials used for the Ark of the Covenant and the Tabernacle. It repeatedly calls for shittim wood, which we know today is Acacia nilotica.
And Acacia nilotica is special.
It is one of the most DMT-rich plants on Earth. The bark and the roots are loaded with dimethyltryptamine. Now, DMT isn't orally active on its own. You need an MAOI inhibitor to make it work, like in an ayahuasca brew. But if you burn it in a confined space...
Like the Holy of Holies, a small enclosed tent within the larger tabernacle.
Exactly. Imagine a hot box, to use a modern, crude term. The high priest goes in there alone once a year. He burns massive amounts of this specific incense made from this specific wood. He wears bells on his robe, and legend has it they tied a rope around his ankle.
Why the rope?
In case he died or passed out in the presence of God. They could pull him out without having to go in themselves. Now, if you look at that through a pharmacological lens, you have a man entering a confined space filled with powerful psychoactive smoke. The vision he receives, the fractals, the voice of God, the sense of timelessness perfectly matches a high-dose DMT experience.
It reframes prophecy not as magic, but as a biological hack. They found a way to tune the radio of the brain to a different frequency.
And then, and this is critical, they monopolize the technology. Only the high priest gets the smoke. Everyone else just gets the rules that he brings out.
And what about manna? The food they supposedly ate for 40 years in the desert.
The description in Exodus is very precise. It's a small, round thing that appears with the morning dew. And the text says if you didn't gather it before the sun got hot, it would melt and breed worms. That is the exact life cycle of the psilocybin mushroom.
Food of the gods.
Literally. It suggests that the gateway to the divine was originally chemical and biological, something available in nature, before it was suppressed and replaced by institutional ritual.
Another piece of lost technology seems to be the balance of gender. We touched on Mary, but this goes back way further, to the Old Testament. The goddess Asherah.
This is a huge piece of the puzzle, confirmed by archaeology. We have found inscriptions on ancient pottery shards blessing people in the name of Yahweh and his Asherah.
So God had a wife.
Yahweh had a wife, or at least a consort. She was the queen of heaven. But the later, more dogmatic reformers purged her. They cut down the Asherah poles, which were sacred trees or poles honoring the goddess. They wanted a centralized, monotheistic, all-masculine cult.
And the people didn't like that.
They resisted. In the book of Jeremiah, the women complained to the prophet. They say, "Since we stopped burning incense to the Queen of Heaven, we have suffered and lacked everything."
Removing the divine feminine had a massive psychological impact.
It created a religion of rigidity, law, and punishment, all archetypally masculine traits, and suppressed intuition, nurturing, and connection to nature. It created a deep psychological imbalance that Western civilization is still dealing with. We are living in a father-only house, and frankly, the house is a mess.
Speaking of psychology, let's talk about quantum faith. This sounds like a modern buzzword, but the specific text in Mark 11.24 is pretty stunning.
It reads like a user manual for the observer effect in quantum physics. Jesus says, "Therefore I say unto you, what things soever ye desire when ye pray, believe that ye receive them, and ye shall have them." Now you have to note the tense shift there.
Believe that you receive them present or past tense.
Right, and then you shall have them. Future tense.
It's not begging.
No. Begging implies lack. Saying, please, please give this to me, affirms to the universe that you don't have it. The instruction is to assume the feeling of the wish already fulfilled. In quantum physics, a wave of potential becomes a particle of reality only when an observer looks at it. The Bible is arguing that faith is the act of observation that collapses the wave. You have to feel it as real before it becomes materially real.
And the word amen, We just say it at the end of every prayer without thinking.
It's likely linked to the Egyptian god Amun-Ra, the hidden one. But sonically, it's a resonance, a seal, like in Eastern traditions. It signals to the subconscious mind and the universe that the command has been executed, so be it.
Fascinating. All right, final segment. Segment 7. Social engineering and practical utility. How was this book actually used to build the modern world? Because it wasn't just about spirits. It was about economics and labor. You have to talk about the slave Bible.
This is a real physical object you can go and see in the Museum of the Bible in Washington, D.C. In 1807, a version of the Bible was produced specifically for enslaved people in the British West Indies. They heavily redacted it. They removed 90% of the Old Testament.
Let me guess. No Exodus.
No Exodus, no let my people go, no stories of liberation, but they made sure to keep Ephesians 6.5. Servants, be obedient to them that are your masters. It was a hacked software patch designed to create compliant workers. They literally engineered a holy book to justify and maintain slavery.
And that work ethic transition continued with the Protestant Reformation?
The Protestant work ethic. Before the Reformation, the holy life was the monk in the monastery praying all day. Work was just a worldly necessity. But Calvin and Luther, they changed that. They taught that all work is holy and, crucially, that financial success was a sign of God's election.
So if you're rich, it means God loves you.
Exactly. It completely flipped the script. It shifted wealth from being suspicious, it's easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle, to being a sign of your salvation. This created the modern capitalist grind set. The drive to accumulate capital became a religious duty. You aren't just making money, you are proving to yourself and the world that you are one of the elect.
We also have these hidden codes in the numbers, gematria.
Right. Hebrew and Greek are alphanumeric languages. Every letter is also a number, so the text can be read as a series of math equations. Genesis 1.1's numerical values imply the value of pi, but my favorite example is the 153 fish in the Gospel of John.
Yeah, why 153? It seems so bizarrely specific. We caught 153 fish. Why not just say about 150 or a lot of fish?
It relates to sacred geometry, specifically the Vesica Pisces, the shape you get when two circles overlap. The mathematical ratio of the height to the width of that shape involves the square root of 3 and the number 153. The great mathematician Archimedes called it the measure of the fish.
So it's a secret handshake.
It's a signal to the initiates. It says the story isn't really about fishing. It's about the intersection of the spiritual and material worlds, which is what the Vesica Pisces represents. The writer was winking at the reader and saying, if you know the math, you know what I'm really talking about.
And finally, the Satan function. We're so used to seeing him as the ultimate villain, the anti-God. But the Old Testament view is very different.
That red-horned, pitchfork-wielding villain is the medieval cartoon version. In the Hebrew Bible, Ha-Satan isn't a name, it's a job title. It means the prosecutor or the adversary. And if you read the book of Job, he works for God. He's on the divine council.
He's quality control.
He's quality control. He tests structural integrity. He roams the earth to see who breaks under pressure. It isn't a dualistic war between two equal powers. God says in Isaiah, I form the light and create darkness. I make peace and create evil. I, the Lord, do all these things. Satan is just the tool God uses to apply pressure for growth. He's the resistance at the gym that makes the muscle grow stronger.
So, bringing all of this home for our outro, what does this all mean? We have deconstructed the politics, the astrotheology, the pharmacology, the control mechanisms. It feels like we've taken the car apart and all the pieces are now scattered across the garage floor.
The synthesis is this. The Bible is best understood as mythologized history. It is a powerful tool for programming human consciousness. And like any powerful tool like nuclear energy or the internet, it can be used in two very different ways. It can be a slave manual, a source of fear, guilt, external authority, and control. That is the empire's version.
Right.
Or it can be a freedom code. If you read it through the Gnostic lens, through the lens of the mystics, if you look for the patterns underneath the dogma.
And the freedom code version always leads you inward.
That is the absolute key. The kingdom is a state of consciousness, not a place you go when you die. The crucifixion is the death of the ego, not just a historical execution. The resurrection is your own spiritual awakening.
And the final provocative thought for our listeners to take with them.
If the Gnostics were right, if the mystics were right, and the spark of the divine, the kingdom of God, is in you right now, then the entire external structure of religion, the buildings, the hierarchies, the tithes, the bishops, is an unnecessary middleman. So the ultimate provocative thought is this. What happens to the entire power structure when you finally realize that you are the temple?
And that is where we leave it. The middleman is fired. This has been The Deep Dive. Thanks for listening.
Keep digging.